I am tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll live in one
Hey,
E.
yeah, 1E, get your seat early.
Yeah. So far, only 200 people have signed up.
Wow,
That's a jump though from 79 yesterday.
Yep. Only have 2 more hours, so we'll see.
Yeah.
that's still quite good. I mean, considering I was number 325 last week for
Yeah.
funding.
I was 99 and I felt bad. Jeez.
Yeah, Alex, 325. I pulled out though. I figured they didn't need to hear me at that point.
It got really funny toward the end. People were like, you guys know the drill. We need more money. We
Yeah.
were like, we got it.
Yeah. Period. Bye.
Yeah, we got it.
It was like, okay, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Lisa, so
So,
happy to see you on.
It's nice to see you as well. It's nice to see all of you.
You
it is
too.
wonderful to see you, Liz.
Well, in my day, they didn't have internet, so we couldn't have these long virtual hearings. You had to truck up to Hartford.
We were literally just talking about that. My LCO was in here and I was like, someone told me it used to be a lottery system. And they were like, well, like you had to physically appear to sign up. So that was
Mhm.
part of like a hurdle. And then people would like sleep in their cars and like race in. I'm like, that's wild. But they
That
would
was
accept people all the way up until right before the public hearing started.
that was the day when briefcases placed in the hallway carried a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Oh, like a placeholder?
Yes.
Like saving your spot?
Yeah.
That's
Wow. No kidding, Alex. I don't
Mm,
remember that.
those were the days.
were they?
Okay. I think we have 12 people, so I don't want to, um, we have a hefty agenda. Did you get my, email this morning?
Yes.
I apologize, guys. I apologize. The Connecticut Finance Project sent that to me by the close of day on Friday, and I intended to send it out over the weekend, but completely forgot. So I apologize that it came to you so late, but I thought it was a wonderful way to start our discussion today as we think about the recommendations we want to put forward for funding in general, um, school choice funding, excess cost funding, etc., seed grant, all of the above. Just give us money. That's, if we could just make a big poster instead, would be perfect. So let's start with the education funding. And is that okay with everybody? All right with you, Jen?
Course.
Everybody?
Fran.
Okay. You're
So you want
thinking?
comments, friends? Franny, or how do you want to
Yeah, I think we should have comments
yeah.
on what you see in the recommendations. Would that be okay?
Well, I have to say I agree with all of these recommendations. I thank Lisa and Patrick for putting a lot of this together. My thought was that as a matter of organization, and I have one substantive comment at the end, but I think it's not helpful to combine several policy proposals in one section. So, for example, in this first section, I would keep separate the idea of bringing the foundation amount up to modern standards to catch up on prior inflation flat funding and have a second section dealing with inflation adjustment going forward.
Okay.
And the same thing actually on the next section, I would divide those up so that you have the phase in of the need-based funding as one item, and you have the phase out of sending district tuition as a separate item, rather than combining these together.
Okay. It sounds good to me.
Can I ask, Alex, what do you mean by combining them into one item? Do you mean one, like you want them in separate bills or
I
separate
want them
sections?
Subsection.
in separate headings. So, for
Yeah.
example, education
oh.
funding, instead of having the bolded first sentence combine, well, it leaves out something. But let's go to the second one. The second one has a combination of phasing in need-based funding and phasing out sending district tuition. Those to me are two separate topics and ought to be separated, each with their own bolded sentence introduction. And in the first paragraph, unfortunately, it simply assumes that we're going to adjust the foundation amount up to current levels and focuses on inflation adjustment going forward. I think we ought to make that first policy assumption more explicit by saying number one item is, as the education bill does, bring up the foundation amount to compensate for past flat funding in terms of inflation.
And then bring the inflation as a separate
Right.
subtopic. I'm
Yeah.
fine with that. And the new need-based and the yeah, I'm fine. I'm not sure I understand the whole thing under open choice.
So I know that a lot of people have their hands raised. Do you
Oh, I'm
want to
sorry.
wait until-
I'm sorry. I can't see on my
I think Leslie was the first, followed by Representative Welander.
okay. Go ahead, Leslie.
Thanks. I just wanted to excuse myself. I'm about to testify in the Labor Committee. My number's about to get called in 2 or 3, so I'm going to be more present in about 10 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Representative Welander?
Thank you. I think these are overall great goals to try to aim for. Under the education funding, would not, oh gosh, the last thing I'd want to do is make our education cost sharing formula any more complicated than it already is. But I think that if we are going to be looking at raising certain portions of funding, we need to have it also reflect the costs that these sending districts are still incurring, whether it is for transportation or special ed services, things like that. So that way we can really reflect what's happening for each. Does that make sense? Like if a sending district is still paying for transportation, should the receiving district or receiving school have that weight adjusted in some way to account for that?
Well, Mary, suppose as I don't see it, that the recommendation doesn't suggest eliminating the ECS payment to the sending district. So it's still receiving funding, even though the student is being educated in the receiving district, with the idea that ECS money could be used for things like the special education obligation of the sending district.
I wasn't sure if they, under the section with the phase out of general education tuition paid by local public school districts to school choice programs, if that indicated like a full shift. I mean, I know these are goals to try to think about, like, what could we do? But I think it's important to sort of recognize that some of our sending districts are still paying for certain services that are not, but the receiving district is still getting full payment.
Yeah, absolutely, Representative. So under the current education funding structure, right, when choice is being exercised, Ascending District is responsible for both general education tuition billing, but then also they are also billed for any special education services and costs associated with those services back to the sending district. So under this recommendation that we have here is a full implementation of what has already been partially implemented, which is simply phasing out general education tuition billing and not special education tuition billing.
Okay.
So the special education costs would still be borne by the sending district, and that what Alex is pointing to in terms of the students still counting in the resident student count of the sending district, that is the reason for the kid to still be counted in the sending district is to cover costs like special education or transportation. But the general education piece is just the bill that you receive for every kid, regardless of what their individual needs are.
Right.
So-
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just a question, Lisa, on that, and to Representative Wieland. Should we spell that out in that paragraph? ECS will continue to the sending district to cover the cost of special ed services and transportation.
Absolutely. We can make that very explicit in that paragraph. Ashley has actually been, she generated this document for us, so she's here and she can make modifications.
Thank you, Ashley. You did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
The reason why I actually raised my hand was in response to what you requested, Alex, with regards to breaking out that phasing in of full student-based funding for schools of choice tied to the phase out of general education tuition billing. And I agree with your first point with regards to separating out the indexing of the foundation along with from the actually getting it up to a level that is more acceptable and one that has been updated from the 2013 level. I actually think that phase in and phase out are very much tied together. So I see those two policies as linked and not necessarily as separate policies, because presumably if the state is using the ECS formula that is student-based to fund our choice operators, then there should not be a need to send back tuition bills to the sending district for costs associated with that student.
Yeah, I understand, Lisa. I think you have a good point, although it assumes that the amounts will be roughly comparable. And I'm not quite sure I derived that from what's in there.
If the state is indexing the foundation, has adjusted the foundation, is indexing the foundation for inflation, then the state would be picking up 100% of non-special education costs associated with that student, utilizing the formula. So the need to bill back to the sending district for non-special education costs should then no longer be necessary and should be eliminated. I don't know if I'm explaining that appropriately. So if
Yeah.
anybody on my team wants to lean in, please do so. But we see the two, the phase in and the phase out, as one policy that has two different components, not necessarily two separate policies. Because if you allow a sending district or if you allow a choice program to then bill back tuition for general education expenses, they're kind of getting plus above what the formula says that they need to be educating their students. And if the formula is an appropriate one that is accounting for the cost to educate a student without additional learning needs and then additional resources for whether or not they're a multilingual learner or a low-income student, then the formula should be sufficient to cover the total cost outside, of course, of special education.
So there would be no, quote, magnet weight, unquote, permitted in the system. In other words, assuming that some magnet schools have resource needs above a inflation-adjusted foundation amount, for example, extra aid in the classroom, extra trips, things that make it magnetized, attractive in a voluntary attendance system. Those things would have to come out of their allocation. That's the same as every other school.
In response to that question, I see that Kate just raised her hand, but in response to that question, I'm not sure if Ashley, in the recommendation summary that you put together, we explicitly call out that the magnet weight that has been partially enacted. But it's certainly not in our organization's recommendations that that weight be removed, in recognition of the fact that magnet school operators do have costs that are above to run these programs that are supposed to be enticing for families to want to send their students to that school.
Kate?
Yeah, in this report, we do not include the magnet.
We could explicitly call it out.
Well, I'm just saying, if you're going to, I mean, I understand your point, Lisa, about keeping the two issues linked, but if you're going to do that, you might need to make some additional reference just to clarify that opportunity. I mean, I
Kate?
think the
Sorry.
main point of this first couple of recommendations comes in the first sentence of the fourth paragraph in the piece, shifting full financial responsibility for choice programs to the state. That's what this is really about. And that's why I had thought delinking the phase-in of student-based funding with the abolition of tuition ought to be separated. But as long as that point gets highlighted, that's understandable. I'm sorry, Kate, I didn't mean to.
No.
No, it's okay. Listen, we got to finish the thought. We don't want to lose them.
Yep, we don't want to lose it.
I think one of the struggle spots for me a little bit in the conversation when we start talking about sort of magnet versus traditional programming, when we start talking about the opportunities to do field trips and extra kind of outside the school experiences, I'd like to think that we would adjust our foundation grant for that to be a standard expectation, because I think that we've come a far, far distance from where students are allowed to have lots of different experiences. And I actually don't think those should be special for magnet school. I think that when we talk about what we believe the appropriate landscape of education is for our children, is we would like all of our children to have a variety of experiences. So I don't know that I think that that's necessarily what I thought magnet schools got additional funding. I thought they had a little bit more resources in terms of, like, if you're going to be an aerospace program, there may be either partnerships or spaces or specific technology that might be necessary that isn't necessary in a traditional school. I think when we factor in what a school experience should be, it should include field trips. It should include opportunities to go to the state capitol or to do whatever it is outside of the building that makes your education relevant. But what I think is that my argument there is that if we are going to provide additional funding that is special for magnet schools, let's be very clear that it's related specifically to the program and not sort of like a base belief of what we think all children should have exposure to. Because I think all children should have exposure to robust libraries. So we should be funding for that. I think all children should have exposure to outside of the school learning. So we should be funding that provides that. I think the exceptionality in magnets is what are the things that are unique to running a sports science academy or aerospace that would not occur within a traditional environment. Because to me, those are the things, and I don't know if those are things that need to be separated out through, grant funding process or whatever it is. But, I think that we've paired a whole lot of experiences out of the regular classroom, to the detriment of our students. And so if we're going to talk about building sort of the best possible view, I think that that's what I'd want it to look like for everybody. And so I think when we talk about what does the foundation grant cover and what doesn't it cover, that's where we should be talking about, like, what is it that a magnet school needs that's different than what we would expect a traditional school to need? I just want to make sure that we're making real delineation on that, because like the one on the field trips like breaks my heart, because every kid should be going on a field trip. Every kid. It shouldn't be the special thing that brings somebody to a magnet school. Like that breaks my heart to contemplate that. So I think we want to make a better definition for those magnet programs, like what makes them truly special. Those are my 2 cents on that.
I hear you, Kate, and I'll work with Ashley to ensure that when we talk about the magnet programming, that we are in fact using language that refers to the aerospace example that you provided.
And I would say to you, sometimes when it pays to have been around a long time. I remember when the magnets were first introduced in the 80s, and it was additional dollars. By the way, there were a lot of promises made by the federal government and the state government at that time that they would be fully funded by both. And it was also said that additional dollars were, they were given additional dollars just to bring forward their program. And every magnet that was created at that time had and I assume they still do, had a theme that they were working with, and dollars were provided for that. So what you're saying is in keeping with what the original purpose was, correct? I mean, not the whole original purpose, but it was to make magnets very attractive.
Right.
Jen?
I do think like this whole conversation really underscores that like all of our schools should be very attractive, and how
Yes.
sort of the purpose we're all here, which is that they all desperately need more money, because money is clearly tied to the opportunities our educators and schools are able to provide for our students to make them extremely attractive. So I just
Agree 100%. And
feel sort of full circle.
Yeah. And I would also
and recognizing that's what we're all here advocating for. But
yeah.
And
I would also say, I remember when field trips were plentiful for all public schools, and kids went to the Capitol and they went all over the place. And to Kate's point, that really has fallen off the radar screen because of cost.
But I do think this is an interesting opportunity as we kind of as we contemplate sort of not just the formula, the funding and the intentionality. I do think it's a really powerful opportunity to revisit the purpose of the magnets, in the sense of like, what is it they offer that should make it an exceptional difference, right? And how do we support that being a reality? Because I do think that sometimes in the kind of shake and bake of just trying to get everything going, that sometimes those things can get lost over time. And this is a unique opportunity to remind everybody that it's not it's a different space, and it has something. But listen, to Jen's point, like everybody should have a good experience, right? We're not saying like, okay, we're going to fund extra over here so that handful, but it is a moment where we could highlight like, what is it that, a magnet does that's different, unique, thematically focused, that offers that.
Leslie's in the waiting room. I don't know who has access to let her in. I'm so sorry. Sorry. When I
Oh,
cut
no,
anyone
that's-
off, I just got a text. And I don't think I have access. And I'm not sure
I don't have access, I don't think. Do
who
I?
created this
I think
Zoom.
Mia,
God, I don't even remember.
I can text Mia.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it was Mia, who I got my
Yeah.
email from.
just wanted to point
Yes,
out.
it is Mia. Yeah,
There we
sorry.
go.
Oh, good. There we go.
Welcome
Okay,
back, Leslie.
you're back.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Just to throw it out there, if we're thinking about sort of where the money is coming from and how it's being used and who gets to have what, a lot of schools have shifted most of their field trip funding to PTA, PTOs.
Mhm.
And so there's maybe one that's provided by the school district, and the rest is coming from parent and community donations. And that again leads to an opportunity for some areas that, you know, other kids can go and explore and be exposed to different things. So it really is a broad purpose. I was a PTA president for a while, and my first term here was a bit crazy, and we had to raise a ton of money to provide transportation for our field trips, and for our school, and that was it. It gets to be a lot. So just to sort of think about that when we're thinking about educational funding, and do we want to even consider taking things like that on? Just tossing it out.
Well,
Well, just to respond a little bit, I mean, some magnet schools run by RESCs are matters of, very logical efficiency. My son, for example, went from Norwalk to school in Trumbull because he wanted to be a film producer, and they had a very advanced film program in the RESC that was run out of Trumbull, and it was very good. In the chef situation, let's not forget we're dealing with magnet schools primarily as a device for desegregating historically been a very segregated regional school systems. And so some of the additional magnet programs or attractiveness, sure, we want all kids to have them. We also want all kids to have a desegregated quality experience. And unfortunately, in today's society, with the school lines drawn the way they are to mimic town lines, we need sometimes to provide incentives to have parents cross town lines, and magnet programs are one way to do that. I mean, aerospace is a good example. There are additional costs associated with aerospace for additional technology and stuff that would be hard to fund out of a regular, allocation. So I'm just saying, let's not forget that the need to attract parents to cross town lines is, a key purpose of many of the magnet schools that we have, in addition to others that are created by RESCs for purposes of, efficiency and speciality.
Leslie?
Yeah, thank you. I know I'm just jumping back in, but I did want to comment on Representative Wielander's comments about the what happens when PTOs fundraise. It's not just a district to district issue, which obviously it is. We know so much in Connecticut is the reality of the two Connecticut's and how it plays out district to district. But we see what you're describing, Representative, within our district as well. That schools that are zoned in our wealthier, whiter neighborhoods have very powerful PTOs that are fundraising with vacation homes. And my daughter goes to a school in the Hill, working class people who, when we attempt to fundraise, it's like there's no money to pull from when the community is fundraising. So we're replicating patterns that the people in this group very much want to break. But when PTOs have to fundraise, we're replicating the patterns that we're trying to undo. I think I'll end here. I think this is an important point when it comes to accountability and transparency. What can we do to document what PTOs are fundraising, and make this more visible for the public, because I'm predicting that this is not part of kind of the part of the transparent effort that we're all engaged with. And I think it would highlight even more of some of the inequalities. And I'm not trying to throw wrenches here, but since it was raised, I just want to kind of reiterate the importance of going towards this in the name of equity for Connecticut's kids, especially in the programs and the schools where parents are working 2-3 jobs and minimum wage and just do not have the resources to auction off their vacation home to ensure that there's a karate program at a school. And those are real examples.
So I'm going to throw, I hope it's not a big wrench, but just a wrench in on the funding for choice programs. One of the things that has concerned me over the years is the inequity in the funding for choice programs. The Chef region gets a whole lot more than New Haven gets or Bridgeport gets. Is there a way to provide some equity in that? I mean, what's the difference? Why? I mean, what I've been told when I was superintendent in Bridgeport was, well, do a lawsuit and then you'll get it. I just, it's very inequitable. I mean, I think it's something like, if I remember correctly, does the state, Alex, you'll know best, the state pays like $13,000 for out of district children?
Rely on Lisa's expertise.
Oh, okay, Lisa.
Depends on the operator, and it depends on the location in the state.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So, I mean, I know when I looked at it, it was like the difference was stark, like 13,000 up in the Hartford area, but 7,000 down in the New Haven area. And I'm not sure what the origins of that are, other than I've been told it's the Chef lawsuit.
Yeah, so Pat
It's
unmuted.
partially that, and Lisa, just returning to the earlier conversation about the interconnectedness between the magnet state grant and the tuition. The reason why the grant is higher for Hartford Public Schools operating a magnet versus New London Public Schools is that Hartford Public Schools cannot charge tuition for students coming into the district. So their state grant is going to be higher than New London Public Schools or New Haven Public Schools operating their magnet programs who do have that ability to charge tuition for kids coming into the district in the magnet programs.
Oh, okay, that explains it. I didn't
Well,
realize that.
That's for Hartford Public Schools operated magnets
Yeah.
specifically, right? So that's a Board of Ed operated magnet, and it's different for Hartford, as Pat just explained, as compared to New London or New Haven. But CREC or Hartford region Chef focused operators do get more in per pupil support than RESC operators outside of the Chef region as well. So Pat, do you have those per pupil grants, which are now a little bit harder to look at and compare with the phase in or the partial phase in of the student-based funding formula? But prior to that, even then, there were differences that an operator received depending on whether or not it was helping the state comply with the Chef versus O'Neill
Is
lawsuit.
the sole differentiating factor whether or not it's helping the state comply, or is there other things that come into consideration?
In statute, it's just whether or not the operator is helping the state to comply with that lawsuit. Am I correct, Pat?
Referring to the prior funding regime,
Yep.
that's the main differentiator. There is some other stuff in there about enrollment from dominant towns versus non-dominant towns, but the Chef is the primary differentiator.
So we have essentially a tiered approach to magnets.
Yes,
That's right.
very much so.
Yeah, and so like that's part of why our organization has been looking specifically at, because not only do you have differences depending on operator, but there's even differences depending on the location of the operator as well. And so by using that one ECS formula to fund all of these students based on their need, looking at the student and not the operator, is part of one of our organization's long-term goals. So that if you're a magnet school student, if you attend, learn, and you're a multilingual learner, you should be getting the same amount of resources from the state as a multilingual learner attending CES or CREC.
That makes total sense. Is that inherent in this, in the student need-based funding?
Yes, but we could make it much more explicit.
I think it should be more explicit because that that was very difficult for me to understand. Other than, helping the state comply, but the needs were the same in Bridgeport or New Haven.
Yeah,
Well, then the adjustment needs to be to bring Bridgeport and New Haven up to Hartford, not to
Yeah,
reduce
no,
Hartford
I
down to
agree with
them,
you.
which has a negative impact on compliance with a constitutional lawsuit.
right, and it's all how towns responded after the chef ruling, right? Like New Haven decided to build a more robust magnet school program than Bridgeport did. And of course, that probably had to do with how much the local municipality could support in like construction costs. I'm not sure if the state paid 100% of the magnet schools that were being built
It
outside
was
of
like
Hartford.
90 or 95% in New Haven.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Right,
mean,
so there was some local burden there, right? And so Bridgeport did not build the same amount of magnet school space that, for example, New Haven did. And then we know that New London was converted to an all magnet district at some point in recent history. But that would need Bridgeport, if they wanted to get that same amount of support for magnet school students, right? They would need to build magnet schools within their district operated by Bridgeport Public Schools.
Right, and there's only one. There's only really one magnet. It's 3 high schools, but it's one magnet. And then there's one run by the
Trumbull,
by the
right?
RESC CES.
Yeah.
But that's it. But I just feel, even if it is one, I think it should be the same as the Hartford. Anybody disagree with putting that in there?
Again, as long as the principal is bringing Bridgeport up to that level and not bringing Hartford down to their level.
Right. Agreed, Alex. Okay. Are we okay on the choice programs then? I just had a question on the open choice. I've always had a question on open choice. It's always been so complicated. Why it's different than everything else is an issue for me. Depending on how many kids you enroll is how much you receive, right?
Right.
What this doesn't state is that was put in as an incentive to encourage open choice receiving districts to make more seats available. I mean, the number of Hartford applications to open choice dwarfs the number of seats offered by suburban districts. So the funding was put in as incentives to both increase the number and increase the size of the cohort so that you ended up with fewer Hartford resident students being alone as the only open choice student in a classroom full of suburban kids, in Avon or something. So there's an incentive aspect to it that's not sort of educationally related per se, but to make it more attractive to suburban school boards.
Right, so this point that is on this document about extending student-centered funding to open choice. So a few years ago, as we all recall, ECS was partially extended to students of choice to the percentage of 42%, to the tune of 42% of full funding. Open choice students were excluded from that policy. And so currently open choice students are continue to be funded according to that funding mechanism that you referenced, Fran, where there's different amounts depending on the number of students that a receiving district is taking in. And so what this recommendation states is that we believe that ECS should be utilized to fund open choice students as well. Because these are, by and large, high need students, and their funding that they receive from the state should also be reflective of their need from the community with which they reside. And so that is what this recommendation states. So rather than a town receiving $8,000 per student, they would receive the full ECS weighted amount for the community with which they reside instead.
So if I remember open choice, when I was doing it, half of it went to the receiving district and half stayed with the sending district. Is that correct?
That is where the kid is counted for the purposes of the ECS grant.
Yeah.
So under the ECS definition of the resident student count, an open choice student is split 50-50 from the sending district and 50 with the receiving district. This recommendation doesn't modify where the kid is counted for the purposes of the ECS resident student count determination. It simply states that, hey, Southington, if you are educating a student that's coming in to your district from Hartford, we recognize the fact that that student and the community with which they reside is a high need community, and therefore you would receive the full ECS grant associated with that student, not the $5,000 that you might have otherwise received. And by receiving that larger grant, one can argue that then you would be incentivizing districts to receive more students into your district to the extent that you're receiving full ECS-based funding for that student. And once again, this is all just regular education. This is not special education expenses.
But the last point that Lisa made ought to be made explicit, that that the higher ECS payment to a receiving open choice district acts as a de facto incentive compared to the current system.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
And I know that there's some, I just want to recognize the fact that there's some distaste for the open choice program amongst some policymakers, as some policymakers and believe that the student should be receiving an appropriate education within their district and shouldn't have to leave their district in order to receive that appropriate level of education. So I just want to cite that, like, we are of the belief at the School and State Finance Project that all students should be funded according to their need, and that there shouldn't be all these different levels of state support depending on what program you might happen to fall into.
Well, that's reasonable, but that's a separate point from these critics that you cite who are willing to operate an unconstitutional segregated school system.
I hear you, Alex.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Yep.
I hear you, Lisa.
It's so interesting because open choice was always well, in Bridgeport, we didn't have too many districts that wanted to take our kids, you know. It was tough to get kids into open choice programs. But
Well, look, not all of this is a financial issue, of course. I
no,
know that Commissioner McQuillan, when he was Commissioner of Education, had proposed to the state board that he be given the authority to allocate numbers of students to open choice districts. And the state school board refused to approve that legislative recommendation. But obviously that's an issue beyond just the finances.
yeah,
Well, I was
Without a
just going
doubt.
to say in most recent downstate, Darien rejected, wouldn't allow children to come in.
right.
9 students from Norwalk, forgive me.
Yeah. And,
Sorry.
you know, so to your point, we have communities that would like to have very tight borders around, perhaps moats if necessary. And I don't know that there's any amount, we're not going to financially incentivize Darien to allow people to come in. This is not a community that suffers a financial challenge. So, you know, I don't know what the answer in spaces of that are, you know, people that are willing to buy an island to make sure their land mass is great enough that they don't need to put in affordable housing are not going to necessarily magically come over to a belief system that's different. So
No.
I think to that end, you know, I would be hard pressed to argue against a funding formula that says we are funding students and students based on need. I think, you know, that makes a great deal of sense in terms of making sure that schools that enroll and keep students, because I was just running through suspension data and was shocked at some of our specialized program schools have incredible expulsion rates. And so I think we need to also acknowledge, like, how does that all factor in? You know, when I look at schools that have 10, 15, 20% expulsion rates and they're, you know, a specialized programming kind of school, that's concerning to me. And I think the retention of students is important as we contemplate this. Because I think it's not enough to say we're going to put them in this program, fund them at a certain level, but it doesn't matter if they survive in that school. I think you know, that has to, and I don't know what the right way to factor it in, but I do think, I know that in the magnet world, there's sort of the retention deadline, and then you owe us money if kids aren't still in there. I think, you know, that's something that we have to stay committed to, because I think retention of students is really critical.
Agreed. I would tell you that many kids were sent back to us in Bridgeport. And, you know, I don't think we kept good data on that. And I remember asking the superintendent in New Haven, because I know that many kids are sent back to New Haven as well. But we don't always have that data readily available. But it's absolutely happening. Okay, I'm okay with the open choice. How about we move on to weighted funding for special ed students? My question here is, does this mean weighted funding for special ed students plus the seed grant? Yes?
Yes, yeah. So this would include the special education students as part of the total need student count used to calculate the ECS grants, correct?
Yeah. And Fran, for some background here, we tried to use this particular kind of recommendation as a way to look at more of a North Star for how Connecticut really should be doing special education funding, which is, you know, something we were talking about in the other thing that we're working on right now, which is that we put special education students and their services into a big bucket right now. And we know that there's a tremendous variety in terms of service intensity and the cost associated with those services across that population. And so what a lot of states have done is use that kind of structure of looking across different levels of service intensity to kind of have a tiered weighted funding model to say, based upon what are the actual specific needs of the kids in your district, which you might have 20% special education in one district and 20% in another district, but the actual intensity of the services in those two districts might look very, very different, even though they have the same number of students across the categories. And so what a lot of states have done, and what we think Connecticut should move to, is really incorporating the level of service intensity as a tiered weight in the ECS funding formula. We know that's a kind of more of a North Star rather than a do now, but we wanted to kind of start to socialize that topic here for a start.
You know, I wasn't sure of that when I was chairing the task force on special ed, but I'm becoming more in tune with it. I think I can tell you that districts cannot continue to survive. And I say that broadly, but the cost of special ed is astronomical. You know, I have the whole idea of why the numbers have grown so much. I think we have some work to do there, but with that said, I would also say that 30% of the budget in some districts is special ed now. And I think this is in part, if you read each district's budget proposal, you'll be hard pressed to find one that doesn't say the cost of special ed has rocketed.
Could I ask a question of Patrick? So, since unlike the other weights, which are knowable in advance, the level of cost and severity of services for special ed are known after the fact. So, how do you incorporate an after the fact financial liability into a forward-looking ECS formula? Because you know who is a multilingual student, you know who lives in poverty and so on for the ECS weights, but you don't know the severity of the special ed service need until after the IEP and everything else are done and the special ed student is assigned. So how do you reconcile those past and future situations by revising the ECS formula as opposed to keeping a structure like the excess cost grant, which is a ex post facto reimbursement based on the actual experience?
So Alex, I would contend that what's true of special education students in terms of we don't know what the needs are and we don't know what the services will cost is very true of multilingual learners as well. We don't, particularly given the migratory nature of that population, on September 1, we don't necessarily know what is the level of services that all multilingual learners are going to need in a specific district. And so at a certain level, right, we're trying to come up with our best approximation there. I would also add that I would see a special ed weight coupled with the existing excess cost reimbursement structure as kind of attacking that problem from both directions, which is to say, given the historical, information and what we know to be true about last year's special education population in a district, we might be able to get close to providing them with the resources that they need through the ECS formula, but then keeping excess cost and obviously adding some more money into that pot for our high cost students, so that when we have kids who are coming into the district and may need that outplacement, we would be able to cover that through the existing excess cost grant structure. So I would think about that in those two ways.
Okay, I think you just might need some sentence or mention about that, because you're talking about really a pretty significant shift in how one arrives at weights, and you may wish to say something about that in this section.
I'm wondering, would it be based on October 1st data, that type of thing? that you have right then? I mean, I
Certainly.
don't
I
know.
mean, I think it's the most recent information that one could have, and I don't, we
Yeah.
got a couple hands up, so I would,
Go ahead. I'm
over
sorry,
them.
Representative, you were next.
No worries. I thought this was a really, really great idea. Because students, we all know that there's a spectrum of need within the special education community, and so this would reflect the increased cost that comes with a student who has severe special needs. So I really appreciate that. My only thought to throw out is that I wouldn't want there to be, I don't know, how do I say this? Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions are so important in trying to prevent further escalation of special service needs. So I just want to make sure that we wouldn't undervalue that at the beginning because it has such a huge return in the end in saving costs for the district.
So that was my concern, Representative, when I was on the special ed task force. I just wanted to make sure that we were very clear on we need to intervene with these kids all along a continuum before they become special ed. And personally, I think we're not doing a great job of that. In every district, there's not a robust MTSS or SRVI, whatever you want to call it. We haven't done any training on it, and we haven't made it a integral part of every school system, and for a lot of reasons. But I think your point is well taken. Jessica?
I wanted to say we at the department have been advocating for fully funding excess cost as well. We've put that in as budget options the last couple of years and obviously have not gotten super far with it. But I did have a question about the SEED piece of it, and I was wondering what you were thinking about when it comes to fully funding SEED, because was supposed to be for new initiatives, so I wasn't sure what the thoughts were and kind of where that dollar figure was coming from when you get to the $190 million.
Okay, we're not quite there yet, but as soon as we get there, we'll ask the question.
Okay.
Okay. So we do think this is a good idea, right? The weighting in the formula for special ed. Yes. Does this,
With a little additional explanation, because it is quite a shift of concept.
yeah,
And I think the point you and Mary were just talking about the need for early intervention funding is important to mention as part of that.
that's why I like the seed grant, because you can use it for early intervention. Kate, you had your hand up first, and then Jen.
I actually just had a statistics question. I was curious, like when we talk about special education, we often talk about it as the bomb that kind of drops into a district and blows up. But in real time, there's a certain number of identified special education students that are predictable. Their programming is established through their IEPs. We do know what they're going to require from us on an annual basis. So I guess I'm a little bit curious, because in my head, excess costs should be the unexpected, the bomb that gets dropped. But I don't think that's what it is anymore. I think it is we don't have enough money to fund these kids, so we're trying to, get it at the back end to get reimbursed. And so I don't know how many new special ed students are the challenge, or if it is we're just not adequately budgeting for the ones that we have. Do you know what I mean? Like, because there's a different problem. If we have all of a sudden annually, there's this extraordinary number of kids being identified that are costly, and that is one problem that this will not solve necessarily. But if what we have is we're not properly funding the cohort of children we know and are currently identified, this then starts to solve that problem. But that was where I was kind of questioning, like, what is the statistics? What is the data telling us about this population and its growth and identification and, effective costs per district? And I don't know if we have that.
Fran, are you okay if I?
Yeah, please.
So I think that your comment about students being educated within a district where you have an IEP and you know the level of service and you know the need that you're going to need to provide to the student, I think that that is what this item here is trying to capture, although it would capture any student that ultimately, as of that date, the reporting date for ECS, is receiving special education services. So a district knows if you have a fourth grader and they're going into fifth grade, for example, you know what the level of services for that student will be in the upcoming year. Approximate, right? Things can change during a
Yeah.
school year, but you know, according to the IEP, what the level of service will be. And so this item here is just recognizing the fact that all special education students are not the same. There's differing levels of need and therefore different costs associated with educating each individual student. And so instead of having one blanket weight, like for multilingual learners, we just have 25%. But we do know that ideally, if we're being pure policy focused individuals here, multilingual learners also come with differing costs and different levels of need, and therefore different costs to educate the student. This item is recognizing the fact that you could have different weights depending on the needs of the students, and that is really the gold star with how you would fund and support special education services for all students. Whereas the excess cost grant, you're right, that grant is supporting students that are the budget busters that you refer to, because if you don't know you're going to have this large expense, because excess cost is once again 4.5 times your per pupil expenditures, any amount above that. If you have a student that comes in mid-year that you were not anticipating due to the high level of cost, that could be detrimental for your budget. You would, something would have to be done in order for the district to be able to cover that expense. So they're two different items. And the excess cost, for some districts, you do know what your excess cost expense is going to be if you don't have kids moving into your district mid-year, unless you get a bill that is unforeseen, that you didn't anticipate the amount that you're being charged for students. But many districts have a pretty good handle on what their excess costs will be in a year, absent any increases or a student moving in from out of district.
Yeah, I would argue that excess cost isn't just for the unexpected. It is also for the very needy students who are going to exceed 4.5 times the cost.
Right, just the extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think it's sort of a compensation for what the feds and the state told us early on, which was they were going to pay 40% of special ed costs. Between the state and the feds, we should have had 80% paid, which they
Still
never
waiting
followed.
for that check in the mail.
Yeah. All right, Jen.
I was just gonna raise, I don't know, maybe, and I apologize, you guys, I just got a call from my kid's school that today was an early dismissal and our sitter didn't show up to pick up my son. So I'm sorry I was off camera. I was trying to get my child picked up. I feel like this is a sympathetic group of people.
We get it.
I'm so sorry. And maybe you guys actually did already touch on this, in case you could just tell me to zip it. But in adding a weight to the formula for students with disabilities, I have a couple concerns. I feel like it's something that maybe we would need a little more conversation on, because I think ECS exists because the court said we needed an equalization grant because of the disparity between wealth in some districts versus other districts. So that's like sort of the historical context of ECS to be an equalizing grant. And I'm worried if we add a weight to special ed, We may also be incentivizing districts to identify kids to get the additional funds, and that could potentially shortchange tier 2 intervention. So I just throw it out there. And also, I worry about sort of the unintended consequences it could have because we don't necessarily have a really clear picture. Unless we're adding a ton of money, how it will get redistributed when we add that weight might not actually be how we would want the money to get redistributed. It's totally possible. For example, wealthy school districts are more proactively identifying students. And so now if you have a higher percentage, for example, in Fairfield of identified students than you do in Bridgeport, I don't think we want to tip the scale where Fairfield would be getting more funds necessarily. I just think maybe it needs more conversation. And also want to recognize like maybe all of that conversation did happen in the select committee last year and I just wasn't a part of it. But I wasn't sure if this got raised here today while I was off camera, so I'm so sorry.
Some of it was raised, Jen, in the special ed task force. My concern was that I already stated it, that we don't have a robust system of intervention prior to. And so I would do anything for, that's why I like the seed funding because it can be used for intervention. I do think that is sadly lacking in many districts for a lot of reasons. The other piece is, I remember when ECS was put together, and you're absolutely right, it was equity-based and all of that. I also remember when the legislature said we don't have money for special ed because we had a separate line for special ed. And they said, okay, we're going to put it into excess to ECS, and 20% of your ECS dollars should go to special ed. I don't know if that is actually happening, but that certainly was where the special ed numbers came in. It wasn't originally that way. Jessica?
Just in some of the things that Rep. Leeper said while we were talking, just one other thing we want to be considering with ECS is that the money goes to the towns, not districts. So if we're going to be putting more money towards special ed, we may want to put it in a different kind of a grant rather than in something like ECS, where the districts may have a little bit more authority over the funds. Because I know this has been such a huge conversation with like the Alliance District stuff and sort of who has control of the money. So putting it in ECS and giving the towns more authority over the money may not be the direction we want to go if we're going to be giving more money related to special ed. We may want to put it in a different kind of grant. So something like the excess cost or something like the seed grant or a different variation of a special ed grant may be a better way to go if we want to more heavily fund special ed rather than going through ECS.
I think that's something we should spend more time on.
Yeah, and I think it's a case, sorry, I'm jumping in, but to make sure we're getting more money into the seed grant specifically, right, Fran, sort of as you were saying, because it also allows for those like tiered interventions to be invested in.
Yeah, but it also has some drawbacks in that it's only brand new programs. Do you know what I mean? So that's an issue too, and it's not enhancing or moving forward with your present program. So I think the parameters of that seed grant could change some. It would be
let's talk more about that.
Yeah, okay. Kate and Lisa.
We have a pretty high referral rate to special education as it is. And just in terms of across the board. And Jen, I appreciate what you were saying about the unintended consequence of suddenly, we have a slew of people who want extra time for the SAT, get their child identified, and now all of a sudden there's a surge in funding to a space that wasn't the intended recipient. Because I know that even in my town, we saw a surge of people who wanted extra time on the SAT. And I'd be like, This is interesting, the identification process we're utilizing here. So it's not that it doesn't happen. I think I am though wondering if that is a little bit negated by and Lisa probably needs to help me, but the means testing on the ECS formula, how that factors in, because I know that there's like everybody doesn't get the same because of the means testing of the municipality. So it may very well be that the unintended consequence may get washed out in that process. But I don't know that that's what would happen. I will say that, I'm conscious that our dollars should be used to motivate the things that we're desiring, the outcomes that we're desiring, right? And so if we are interested in motivating interventions earlier, if we're interested in incentivizing programmatic changes in kindergarten, first and second grade, so that we're not identifying rambunctious children as special education students, right? Like if those are the thing, how are we incentivizing those opportunities? I think is also a really powerful, when we're talking about funding, a powerful question for us to engage with, because ultimately, like it or not, districts will track towards the money, right? Like that's what they're going to do if we provide incentivizing in certain spaces. So I would be certainly a proponent of, I was going to ask about the seed grant money as well, like how it's currently being utilized, and if it's getting exhausted. I'm assuming it would be, but I don't know that to be true, so it's always a good question. And if that's an opportunity for us. But I also would be curious about the true impact of adding in that factor, and like, are we talking, is this a $50 million shift? Is this a $20 million shift if we were to add the special education weight? Because I know it's not a dollar for dollar. So that's kind of where my head goes in all of those spaces. I don't tend to think we are. I mean, I'd really like to believe that districts would not identify children just to increase their allocations. I mean, I struggle with that as a, but I do think there's an unintended consequence when we do have a couple of spaces where there are exuberant parents involved. I don't know that it's a district as much as it's exuberant parents. And
Agree. I just want to say also, I don't think the districts would be necessary. I think that maybe you'd be a little less likely to fight exuberant parents. I don't know. Sorry, Kate.
Trying to get the extra, it's the extra time on the SAT where I've seen it. And that's just proximity because that's my high school teacher experience. But yeah, so and again, I don't know if that impact is mitigated out over a little bit of waiting, but.
Please.
Thank you. I was just going to comment along the lines of Kate that, this weight would be based off of a student's IEP. So you would need to have an IEP in place. And I'm not sure how much it would incentivize districts to encourage the use of IEPs and to proactively, seek them out to receive what could be minimal support back to the district, which then the district is then on the hook to provide the full cost of the IEP. And to Jessica's point about money flowing to districts and the tension between municipalities and districts, a topic that I'll just throw out there, recognizing the fact that there's only 14 minutes left scheduled for this meeting, is fiscally independent school districts as also a possibility for the state to pursue, where money would flow directly to the boards of education and we would
Thank you
entirely.
You think we could say that in the Bergen report? Could we say that right in the beginning? I mean, why does it flow to the municipality? And, I hear it from, some superintendents and districts have great relationships with the municipality, right? And it works well and they have no problem. Others, honestly, the it's like pulling teeth to get the excess, to get the ECS dollars or whatever. And forget about excess cost. I mean, that in some districts never comes to the district.
I think that we should say it. We had it on our agenda and continue to have it on our legislative agenda to direct fund districts. There's no actual good reason for pass-through funding. Like there really isn't, other than if you meet with the appropriations chair, they tell you that it's all mismanagement on everybody's. So it's a way to manage the resources with some oversight. And I think that gives the municipalities way too much credit personally. But I would love to see us actually articulate that a goal would be to direct fund the districts.
And I'm fine with that. I just need to, I need to be sure of unintended consequences. I don't know if there are any, but.
Probably not ones that people will say out loud. Because let's be honest, what is the only reason a municipality holds money? Why would they hold the money and not release it directly to the Board of Ed? Like, really?
Yeah.
What legitimate reason would they have? I can't come up with a legitimate reason.
I don't understand why it's.
But it happens.
Yeah, I honestly don't understand why it was done this way, but
Well,
let's come back to it next time through. Let's take a week or 2 weeks to think about this and come back to it, because it's a huge piece. And I'm not even going to go, the next piece I wanted to go to was the excess cost grant, if we can. And allowing that we have not settled this waiting thing, okay? And we'll see where that goes in the next couple of weeks. And we did say it would be consensus. Whatever was in here would be the consensus. So we'll come back to it. On the excess cost grant, I do agree that the excess cost needs to be fully funded, but I'd like to just throw something out on a tiered funding piece. If the cost of the student that is being served in district is 2 times the amount of the per pupil expenditure, and maybe 3 times for the rest, and then 4.5 for private. Just a tiered approach rather than just 4.5. I just think it provides more incentive to educate within the district.
Fran, I have a question on that, because one of the conversation pieces around that topic has been utilizing the per pupil expenditure in the district creates different
yeah,
challenges, right? So if I am a district where the per pupil expenditure is 18,000, it's easier for me to meet that threshold than if I am a district where it takes $24,000 as my per pupil expenditure. So we create sort of this, would it be better for us to utilize as the cost, the average across the state, as opposed to the per pupil in that district? And I don't know if that's the right metric or not, but I do think we create a disadvantage that is unintended in the work that's being done. But I don't know. Like, I get that if we used, to be fair, I get if we use the average per pupil expenditure, there are some districts for whom that is less than, and then there are some that for whom that is more. But at least then it's a little bit more, I think, consistent across. And I don't know if that's reasonable or unreasonable, to be honest.
me either. I don't know. What do you think?
Some considerations for the group on that topic, Kate. Related to the conversation on ECS, there is that correlation between district wealth and per pupil expenditure, such that districts that are on the wealthier side can obviously they can generate tax revenue, and they do spend more per pupil. And so that might be a kind of a de facto subsidy to some of our higher spending districts who happen to have more property wealth as just a consideration for this group. I'd also add that I think we're getting more relevant to some of the legislation that was passed last session on special ed outplacements. We should be getting some more information about the costs of these services, such that CSDE is going to be setting some more the tuition rates moving forward, as I understand, over the next couple of years. To me, that could be an opportunity to say, okay, we have good information. We might have better information about what we're actually paying for these services. And CSDE has an additional oversight role on that they didn't have previously. Is there a way to use that information as part of our determination for the excess cost grant in some form or fashion? I just bring that up to the group because too often we kind of add things on top of each other, right, in education funding, and we don't consider what's already there below.
Fran, would you repeat your 3 tiers again? Fran, you're muted, I think.
I muted so my dogs wouldn't bark.
Okay.
But if a
Yeah, just repeat what they are.
yeah, 2, 3, and 4.5.
And the 3 would be for who again?
Risks. Although I'm a little iffy on that, to be honest with you. But I am not iffy on a different tier for the district. I'd like to discuss the risks more. Only because their costs have risen a whole lot too.
But the basic would come down to 2 or 2.5
Yeah.
times. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe we can just think about it for the next time, because we are at 2:24. I want to be conscious. I know people have 2:30 meetings, and I think Jen and I would like to set another meeting. So what you're thinking for the next meeting? Believe it or not, I thought we would be finished today. Oh well, such is life. But
Can I ask a quick catch-up question, Fran?
yeah, sure.
I
Leslie.
apologize that I missed the beginning part of the conversation. Where did we land on the foundation aid? Are we just on indexing to inflation, or are we taking a stand on an increase as well?
We took a stand on both, I think.
Got
right?
it. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any can you throw out dates? I'm assuming next week won't work. It's too soon.
Well, do we need to do research, or do we just need to continue this conversation?
I think we just need to continue the conversation. And if there is some research, I'm sure the Connecticut Finance Project will have a lot of answers. They've been working on this for a while.
Are Ashley and Patrick going to do some redrafting? I wasn't sure from what Lisa said earlier.
Yeah, Ashley will take another cut at this and will circulate through Fran for a review.
So, is there any possibility of the 24th at 2 to 3:30?
You literally have my only open hour on that day. That's
What was
What's the
amazing,
date again,
Fran.
Fran?
The 24th from 2 to 3:30. Maybe just a thumbs up if you can do it.
I'm not free until 2:30 that day.
What?
I could do starting at 2:30 that day.
I could do 2:30. 2:30? Okay. We got it. 2:30 on the 24th. And Ashley, thank you. And thank you so much to the Connecticut Finance Project. I don't know what we would do. We really appreciate your coming forward with the recommendations. It's always good to have a document in front of you to work from. And so we'll, I promise you, I'll send it out sooner than I did this one, but, we will have something to, react to next time, and we'll go back again to the weighting and the excess cost, and I don't think we'll finish next time either, because we have Alliance District, which I think will take us a little bit of time.
No time at all, Fran. We'll figure it all out in under 25 minutes. We'll
Yeah.
set a timer.
Okay, perfect, perfect. I'd be happy with that, but at any rate, I don't think it's, it's okay. I want us to have the best possible recommendations that reflect all the perspectives, on this subgroup. I think we're fortunate we have so many different perspectives, so thank you. Thank you all. And we'll see you on the 24th. All right,
Thanks,
Thank-
everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody.
Have
Bye.
a good one.
you too.